ABC Radio Brisbane. You're listening to Steve Austin.
Well, when you think of environmental work or environmental advocates, you might think of one big group in lockstep with each other on climate change and the natural environment. But as we've been talking about throughout the morning following the US election, it's dangerous to think of any group as a monolith. There is a battle brewing between environmental scientists as vital habitat is being bulldozed for, some would argue, vital renewable energy projects. Particularly near Rockhampton, the Clark Creek wind farm is being built. It will apparently, or it aims to provide power to 33,000 homes. But there's a major issue. It's cutting through prime agricultural land and koala habitats. Large swathes of trees and koala habitat are being bulldozed. And it's not the only place in Queensland where it's happening. So let's go to my guest, Hugh Possingham, Professor of Mathematics and Ecology at the University of Queensland and Co-Chief Counsellor at the Biodiversity Council. Professor Possingham, thanks for your time.
Good morning, Steve. Hi.
What are your main concerns with the way land clearing is occurring in Queensland for renewable energy projects?
Yeah, I mean, the main concern is, we can have our cake and eat it too. So there's no doubt about it that we need to transition to renewables quickly, as fast as possible, for the security of humanity, for our economy, but also for nature. In fact, if the temperature rises rapidly and too much, potentially climate change, we model, could around the world wipe out 20% of all species. So that's enormous. That's more than we have wiped out in the last 200 or 300 years. So climate change is a conservation problem, not just a human or economic problem. That said, when we put in all this renewable infrastructure, we would prefer that it doesn't destroy nature when it goes in, and whether that's wind farms or transmission lines or the associated roads or also solar panel farms. So, in fact, it doesn't make a lot of sense sometimes, because when you destroy native vegetation, you emit a lot of carbon dioxide, which is exactly what you were trying to avoid. And to your point of high-value agricultural land, I mean, the Agriculture Department, when I was Chief Scientist, they had a lovely map. It was a map of Queensland. It showed the 4% of Queensland, 4.5% of Queensland that's high-value agricultural land for cropping. Really, that's the food bowl of Queensland. There's not a lot of point of putting solar panels, wind farms, or even houses on that land because it is so valuable. The same is true for nature. We can produce maps of the 5 or 10% of Queensland that is absolutely essential for nature. We'd really rather prefer people didn't destroy it.
Particularly koala habitat, because koalas only eat certain sorts of eucalypt, not all eucalypt, as I understand it, Hugh.
That's definitely true, and they prefer particular kinds of habitats. One of the other species, a lot of the wind farms are going along ridge tops, as actually talked about the Clark Range. It's one of many developments. Those ridge top areas have actually been reasonably well conserved, partly because they're not so useful for agriculture, but that's where things like the greater glider, which is also a listed species, probably more endangered than the koala, needs big hollows. So a koala, I can plant a tree and in 15 years' time a koala can be living in it. With a greater glider, imagine a hollow that's 10 centimetres wide. How old does a tree have to be to live for that hollow to form, for a greater glider to live in it? That's 200 years. So replacing that habitat is extremely slow.
I mentioned Clark Creek near Rockhampton as one of the hotspots where there are concerns about the clearing that's taking place for solar and wind. What are the other areas around Queensland where there's concern about how this is being undertaken?
All across Queensland, all along the Great Dividing Range, all the way up, even close to the wet tropics. Now, because the wet tropics is a World Heritage Area, listed areas, that's probably, nobody would really want to propose wind farms there in those very highly endangered and valued rainforests. But nearby, there are important ranges and high areas that are under threat, and some developments have happened there with solar panels. It can be anywhere, and that happens often on high-value agricultural land. And this is not just Queensland. This is happening all over Australia. The rollout for renewables is going to have a big footprint. if you include all the aspects of renewable rollout and even go into for example, the mining of the critical minerals, we're talking about a big fraction of Australia. And our point really, in fact, I think the scientists are all aligned, and I had this conversation with multiple ministers over the last 3 or 4 years, have a proper plan. When you're rolling out infrastructure, whether it's houses, solar farms, wind farms, why not tell the developers these places are sacrosanct? You will not get approvals to go here. This is destroying important habitat. This is destroying important agricultural land. This is going to cause too much erosion. Then there's some places where we say, actually, this is highly degraded agricultural land. Please go here. It's not very valuable. It's not important for biodiversity, and we'll give you these approvals far faster by going there. And there could be some places in the middle where we want to argue about. But what I
so give them an incentive to build. Give them an incentive to build in the right places that don't destroy as much of the natural habitat as is currently happening.
Perfectly said. And it's just about smart planning, and it's win-win outcome for industry and all aspects of nature. And, there are tools to do this. A tool that my lab developed was used in the Mojave Desert 10 years ago to plan renewable energy infrastructure. So we are world leaders in this sort of stuff. The BirdLife Australia has a tool that's called AviStep that helps you understand how wind farms, it's not just the habitat destruction that we were talking about, but these wind turbines hit bats and they hit birds of prey and they hit water birds, and that's a major threat in some parts of Australia and including Queensland. All of these tools can be brought to bear to do smart planning. I've just found it frustrating in the last 5 or 10 years of my career to try and convince state and federal governments to do proper planning.
Hugh Possingham is Professor of Mathematics and Ecology at the University of Queensland, Co-Chief Counsellor at the Biodiversity Council. We're talking about the land clearing that's taking place for renewable energy projects. It makes me think, Hugh, of that phrase during the Vietnam War. The Americans had this bizarre phrase, we had to destroy the village to save it. You don't want that. You want to try and get the best possible outcome. Where in Queensland is being most affected by land clearing, Hugh? I know you said it's happening all over. Yeah. Where are the hot spots or the real difficult points, do you think?
Yeah, it is those areas for the wind farms. They obviously, the wind farm developers and those companies, renewable energy companies, they have maps of the profitability of sites, and obviously you need a lot of wind. Yep. You need consistent wind. You need to be able to get access into the high transmission lines.
So you said that's the Great Dividing Range. I get that. Can you name the actual towns? Can you name
No, I can't.
Right, okay.
I don't know those things.
That's okay.
And another part of the solution is proximity also to those transmission lines. So we could go further west. There is wind further west, but we need the high transmission lines, and that's another issue that government could be dealing with. If they would commit to putting those lines out there, then solar and wind in further inland areas, usually which are less contentious from a biodiversity perspective, could also be developed. So I think there's really huge opportunities for this new government to sit down with all the industries and say, let's try and do this properly and get win-win outcomes.
This is what puzzles me. About a third of Queensland's boundary is actually water, coastline. Why don't we do more in the area of wave electricity generation or tidal electricity generation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose one thing is so much of it is the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, and that has always been seen as sacrosanct and therefore quite a difficult place to develop those sorts of industries. But you're right, where there are big tides and also where there's lots of swell, potential tidal energy generators. The Europeans do that a lot. There are a wide variety of options that aren't just wind and solar. Pumped hydro is important, but even that is also, we have to be very thoughtful about pumped hydro, where those dams go. They don't have to be gigantic dams. They can be quite small dams. But storage is going to use a lot of space. Batteries use a lot of space. Pumped hydro use a lot of space. But again, there are some interesting options. I think we've been rushing. We've been pushing ahead, and we haven't given clear direction to industry of what's a win-win outcome. Some of these companies putting in these wind farms have found they have to pay compensation bills through biodiversity offsetting, and that's costing them tens of millions of dollars because they have to promise then to pay back for the restoration of that habitat, which actually doesn't work very well. again, lose-lose outcome, and then, therefore, they have an unforeseen bill.
Hugh, you're a mathematician, amongst other things, so I have to ask, why don't we seriously consider nuclear? The pad of it will go on an old coal-fired power station place. We want to get rid of those coal-fired power stations.
Yep.
Why not at least have an open mind about nuclear energy?
Yeah. Well, I raise it occasionally with my wife, so the conversation potentially ends in divorce. I mean, I would say, I think I wish we'd had this chat in 1970, and then I think we probably would have done what you just said. If we knew the damage that carbon dioxide was going to do to the planet, much of the world would have gone nuclear, and we would have been faster, more efficient at doing those things. At the moment, if you do all the maths, it's just actually economic insanity because it is so expensive and so slow. So that door closed. I wished it hadn't closed, but it did for Australia.
My guest is Professor Hugh Possingham, Professor of Mathematics and Ecology at UQ and Co-Chief Counsellor at the Biodiversity Council. So how do we resolve this dilemma that we've got a new state government? They're saying we're going to look at some smaller pumped hydro projects. I'm not sure that they've got a great many locations where they can, just because of the geography and geology doesn't necessarily work in their favour for pumped hydro, smaller ones. What do they do? What do they consider? Yeah,
I mean, any steep area. I mean, some of these pumped hydro dams don't need to be much more than maybe, a couple of 100 hectares. So they don't have to be gigantic dams. They just need to be in a steep place. Again, near the transmission lines. I just think engage and let's have a think tank about what these future options are. I mean, it is the advantage of a new government. There is a reset of thinking.
Yep.
And they've already decided to throw out one of these dams, but we do need the storage capacity. Pumped hydro is wonderful because it is an incredibly efficient way of storing energy. The efficiency is something like over 90%. You do not lose a lot. For example, if you store energy as hydrogen, liquid hydrogen, you lose a lot of energy in the process of making the liquid hydrogen and then converting it back to energy. So I'm a big fan of pumped hydro, but to your point, all the ducks have to line up. The social issues, who owns the property, what are the risks, is it in my backyard? Is it going to also flood important habitat for threatened species?
Yes.
Again, it's all about good planning and smart decision making, and those discussions are long discussions, and it's not unlike the discussion around where do we put another 100,000 people a year in southeast Queensland.
Yeah.
Where do we put all those houses? That's a discussion I really wish we would have more sensibly.
Well, we're going to need a lot more power sources because if we keep going the EV direction, that's going to be a huge drain. But the thing that really surprises me is the big computer data centres and AI requirements. The energy and the energy and the water needs of those data centres is massive. I mean, seriously massive.
Yes, mining Bitcoin, whatever that means, is using huge amounts of power. But I'll give you another huge one that is an enormous economic advantage to Australia. If we can start producing renewable energy at a high rate, we can start smelting all our own ore, aluminium, iron, copper, smelt it here. And that actually saves the world because we send it often to places like northeastern Asia, Korea, Japan, northeastern China. They will never be able to produce enough renewable to satisfy their needs. So when people say Australia's a small country, and the Garneau report showed this, we're only 1 or 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions. We can save 8% of the world's global greenhouse gas emissions by using renewables to smelt ore in Australia before we sell it. And wouldn't that be amazing?
Yes.
That would be amazing. But to your point, the demands for renewable energy are not just houses and industry that we have now. It's Bitcoin mining, it's data. They're going through the roof. The British plan, their use of energy is going to be something like 8-fold bigger by 2050. Not because they think they're going to have 8 times as many people. Just we are very hungry for energy. So the footprint isn't just, they say we're going to power 30,000 houses with this particular development. We're talking about energy demands that are beyond people's belief, and we have to do it much smarter than we're doing now.
I'll leave it there, Hugh. Thanks for so much of your time.
Thanks, Steve.